Mark stood in the center of the garage, the air thick with the scent of oil and stagnant dust. He stared at the white surface of the board mounted on the wall. It was perfectly empty. For years, he had chased every shortcut, every quick win, and every promise of overnight success. He looked at the reflection of his own face in the darkened window, then back at the board. The silence in the room felt heavy, pressing against his ears. His bank account had not moved in years, a frozen number that mocked his efforts. He had built nothing. He had created nothing. The board remained a stark reminder of every missed opportunity and every wasted hour. He gripped the edge of the workbench until his knuckles turned pale. The frustration was not a sudden explosion. It was a slow, grinding weight that had settled into his bones. He had spent his time looking for exits, for loopholes, for ways to bypass the work. Now, he was left with nothing but a blank space and the crushing realization that he had been asking for profit without ever providing a solution. He stood there, watching the light fade from the room, waiting for a direction that had not yet appeared. He exhaled, a long, ragged sound that vanished into the rafters. He turned away from the blank surface, his boots scraping against the concrete floor. His eyes scanned the cluttered workbench, passing over discarded tools and rusted hardware, until they landed on a stack of forgotten papers. Beneath a heavy wrench lay a copy of Think and Grow Rich. The cover was dull, muted by a thick layer of gray grit. He reached out, his fingers tracing the spine before he pulled it free. He blew a cloud of dust into the air, watching it dance in the sliver of dying light. The book felt substantial, a solid weight in his palm that contrasted with the void of the whiteboard. He flipped through the pages, the paper dry and brittle under his touch. He stopped at a marked section, the ink faded but the message biting and sharp. He read the words, "Decide the exact amount." The sentence pulled at his attention, refusing to let go. For the first time in months, the heavy fog in his mind began to thin. The path forward was not about luck or shortcuts. It was about a decision. He stared at the page, and the silence in the room shifted from a heavy burden into a focused, waiting stillness. Mark dropped the book onto the bench and reached for the dry erase marker. His hand moved with a new, deliberate speed. He uncapped the marker, the sharp scent of solvent filling the air, and turned back to the whiteboard. With firm, dark strokes, he wrote $1 million across the center of the board. The numbers looked stark, almost aggressive against the white surface. He stared at the figure. It felt heavy, a weight that suddenly seemed meaningless. Why this number? What did he have to offer that justified such a sum? The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had spent his entire life begging the universe for wealth, treating success like a lottery win he was owed. He had been asking for gold without ever building the mine. His chest tightened. The greed of his past strategy was laid bare. He grabbed the marker again, pressing the tip hard enough to make it squeak, and wrote "Value Created" in the empty space below the number. The words were a declaration. He finally understood that money was not a goal to be grabbed, but a reward for the problems he solved. The whiteboard was no longer a blank void. It was a roadmap. He dropped the marker, his breathing steady, and looked at the wall with a clarity he had never possessed before. Mark cleared the workbench, pushing aside the wrench and the book to make room for his laptop. He flipped the lid open. The screen flared, casting a harsh, artificial glow against his face. He navigated to a course on digital marketing, a field he had previously dismissed as shallow. Now, it was his only bridge. He clicked the first module. A wall of jargon hit him. Funnels, conversion rates, pixel tracking. He leaned back, the air in the garage feeling suddenly thin. His eyes burned as he stared at the complex diagrams. He reached for the trackpad to close the window, the urge to retreat into familiar, low-effort work clawing at his focus. He forced his hand to pull away. He grabbed a pen and began to map out the concepts on the back of a grocery receipt. He sketched the flow, erased, and sketched again. His jaw tightened. The concepts were not just numbers. They were a language he had to learn to build his mind. Every time he failed to grasp a step, he went back to the start. He typed, deleted, and reread until the logic began to click. The garage grew dark, but he did not move. He was no longer just a man in a room. He was an apprentice, and the screen was his only tutor. The alarm sounded at 4, a jagged tear in the silence of the pre-dawn dark. Mark lay still, his body heavy, every muscle demanding he stay under the covers. The air in the garage was biting, a thin layer of frost clinging to the concrete floor. He stared at the ceiling. He shifted, his feet hitting the cold floor, and the shock of it forced him upright. He did not check the time. He did not look for a reason to linger. He moved to the workbench, his movements stiff and mechanical. He pulled the chair out, the wood scraping harshly against the floor, and sat down. His hands were numb, so he rubbed them together until the friction brought a dull heat. He opened the laptop. The screen light hit his eyes, a stark, unwelcome brightness that signaled the start of his shift. His head throbbed, but he did not pause to rub his temples. He opened the notes, aligned his cursor, and began. 2 hours. No distractions. No excuses. The first 30 minutes were a battle against his own biology, a slow grind of forcing data into his tired brain. He pushed through the resistance, watching the clock with a single-minded intensity. By the second hour, the fog lifted, replaced by the sharp clarity of a man who had finally mastered his own will. The garage was a tomb of silence, and Mark intended to keep it that way. His phone sat face down on the workbench, a black rectangle waiting to pull him back, covering the noise. The cold buzzed, a sharp, vibrating rattle against the wood that demanded his attention. He did not turn. He did not reach for it. He kept his eyes fixed on the lines of code and strategy illuminated on his screen. The lure of the television in the corner, a relic of his past procrastination, felt heavy in the room, a phantom weight he had to actively push away. He stood up, walked to the far wall, and unplugged the set, the sudden silence deepening the stillness of his sanctuary. He returned to his chair and locked his posture, shoulders square, feet planted. Outside, the world started its day, but inside the garage, time moved at his pace. Every notification he ignored felt like a brick in a wall he was building around his focus. The air here was no longer cold. It was charged with the friction of his own intent. He was carving a new identity out of the raw material of his attention, discarding the distractions that had kept him stagnant for years. The screen glowed brighter, the only light in his focused world, and he dove back into the work. The interface was ready, every pixel aligned, every line of copy polished to a sharp edge. Mark hovered his cursor over the button that would push his service live to the world. His pulse hammered in his neck, a rhythmic thud that echoed the silence of the garage. He leaned back, the chair groaning under his weight, and looked at the whiteboard one last time. The million-dollar goal was still there, but now it felt like a destination he could finally see. He turned back to the screen. The cursor flickered, a tiny pulse of light demanding a decision. He gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white, and held his breath. The air in the room felt thick, charged with the static of potential. He did not blink. He tightened his finger on the mouse, felt the mechanical resistance of the button, and pushed. A single click. The progress bar surged, a thin blue line racing across the screen. It was done. The service was live. A surge of raw energy hit his chest, immediate and sharp. He stood up, pacing the small width of the garage, his hands trembling with the sudden release of tension. The waiting was over. The world was now receiving his offer, and for the first time in years, he was no longer just preparing to act. He was in the arena. The screen glowed with the cold, unforgiving light of the analytics dashboard. Mark clicked refresh. The numbers remained unchanged. 0 conversions, 0 revenue. The graph, which he had envisioned as a sharp climb, was a flat, dead line dragging across the bottom of the display. He clicked again, his thumb pressing hard against the plastic, but the result was the same. The venture was over. He pushed his chair back, the metal legs scraping harshly against the concrete floor, a sound that seemed to mock the quiet of the garage. He stared at the whiteboard, at the bold, handwritten goal he had scrawled months ago. It looked like a taunt now. The air in the room, once charged with potential, felt thin and stagnant. He stood up and walked to the workbench, his movements stiff. He checked his phone. There were no inquiries, no emails, no signs of life. The silence of the garage was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage. He pressed his palms against the edge of the workbench, feeling the rough texture of the wood beneath his skin. This was the failure he had spent months trying to outrun. It had caught up, and it was colder than he had ever imagined. He looked at the blank, empty space on the desk, the weight of the moment pressing into his shoulders. Mark did not move for a long time. The screen's glow flickered and dimmed as the laptop entered sleep mode, leaving him in near total darkness. He watched the last sliver of light vanish, feeling the familiar, heavy pull of his old life. It was a gravity he knew too well, the safety of being invisible, the ease of doing nothing. He reached out to shut the lid, his hand hovering over the plastic casing. If he stopped now, the pain would stop too. He could go back to the days before the whiteboard, before the pressure of the $1,000,000 goal. He could return to the routine of clock watching and empty weekends. The thought felt like a warm, suffocating blanket. He sat back, his chest tight, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. The silence of the garage was heavy, pressing against his ears. Every shadow seemed to whisper that he had reached his limit. He looked at the whiteboard, now just a gray rectangle in the gloom, and felt the urge to erase it. The failure wasn't just a business loss. It was a mirror showing him exactly what he feared most, that he was not built for this. He gripped the edge of the workbench until his knuckles ached, the cold surface biting into his skin, as he teetered on the edge of walking away forever. His hand lingered on the edge of the workbench, his fingers brushing against a hard, rectangular object. He pulled his hand back, then reached again, closing his grip around the spine of the dusty book he had ignored for weeks. He thumbed through the worn pages until he reached the marked passage on persistence. The words did not offer comfort. They offered a blueprint. He read the lines twice, his breath slowing, the suffocating weight of the room shifting. He stood up, the chair legs scraping the floor, and turned toward the whiteboard. The ghost of his failed project remained in the center, but he stepped forward, grabbing the eraser with a sudden, sharp movement. He wiped the board clean, the screech of the felt against the surface echoing in the quiet garage. He did not look back at the mess on the desk. He clicked the marker, the sound crisp and final. His eyes, once clouded with the haze of defeat, now held a focused, hard-edged clarity. He did not need a miracle. He needed a process. He stood before the empty white space, pressed the tip of the pen against the surface, and began to map out the next move. The hesitation was gone, replaced by the rhythmic, steady movement of the marker against the board. Mark did not start with the future. He started with the wreckage. He pulled the stack of invoices and performance reports from the drawer, slamming them onto the workbench. He opened a new notepad and drew a line down the center. On the left, he wrote every dollar spent. On the right, every lead that failed to convert. He began to cross-examine his own work. He traced the customer journey, circling the exact moment the funnel broke. He found it a 3-day gap in communication where he had assumed the automated system would handle the follow-up. It hadn't. He stared at the error, the ink bleeding into the paper. It was a failure of his own design. He marked the page with a thick, jagged X. He moved through the data with a surgeon's cold detachment, stripping away his excuses one by one. There was no room for sentiment in this audit. He tallied the wasted hours, the misallocated budget, and the vanity metrics that had blinded him to the reality of his product-market fit. By the time he reached the final line, the garage felt smaller, the air tighter. He had stripped the failure down to its barest bones. The mistakes were no longer ghosts. They were data points. And now, they were under his control. Mark did not pause to mourn the findings. He flipped to a fresh page, his pen moving with a frantic, rhythmic intensity. He identified 10 companies, 10 targets that needed exactly what he had spent the last month refining. He wrote the names in a column, then beside each, he scribbled a specific pain point he could solve. The garage felt charged, the air humming with the weight of the afternoon ahead. He checked his watch. 2 o'clock. The window of opportunity was closing. He stood and paced the narrow concrete strip, rehearsing his opening lines under his breath. The silence of the room was punctuated only by the sharp metallic ticking of the clock on the wall. Each second felt like a heartbeat. He gathered his notes, organized his pitch deck, and set his phone on the table. He did not check his notifications. He did not look at the door. He stared at the list of 10 names, his jaw set, his pulse steadying into a rhythm of total readiness. He grabbed his bag, his movements sharp and efficient. The preparation was over. The confrontation was waiting. He took one final, deep breath, reached out, and touched the first name on his list. It was time. Mark dialed the first number. The line rang 3 times before a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Not interested," the man barked, the connection snapping shut like a trap. Mark stared at the phone. He marked a red line through the first name. The rejection landed in his chest like a heavy stone, but he did not set the pen down. He dialed the second number. This time, a woman answered, her tone dismissive before he finished his opening sentence. "We have no budget for this," she stated, followed by the hollow hum of a dial tone. He blinked, the sting of the words tightening his throat. He forced his lungs to expand, steadying his breathing against the rising pressure. He did not look away from the list. He crossed out the second name, the ink scratching harshly against the paper. A third call, a fourth. Each no arrived faster than the last, stripping away the thin veneer of his confidence. He felt the weight of his own voice, yet he kept it flat, controlled, and devoid of tremor. He was not here to be liked. He was here to be heard. He checked the ledger, noted the 4 failed attempts, and reached for the phone again. The 5th call started with a dry throat. Mark gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white, and pressed the speaker button. His voice sounded thin, raspy, but he held the pitch steady. Another rejection followed, cold and abrupt, but the sting was fading, replaced by a numbing, mechanical focus. He leaned his forehead against the cool surface of the wall, closing his eyes for a heartbeat. Sweat clung to his skin and his shirt stuck to his back, but he did not stop. He wiped his palms on his trousers and reached for the phone. The 6th number was a blur on the page. He dialed, his thumb shaking, but his resolve held like iron. As the line connected, a surge of adrenaline sharpened his senses. He did not ask for permission. He stated his value with a sudden, jagged intensity that filled the room. He was no longer just making calls. He was tearing through the barrier of his own comfort. His pulse thundered in his ears, rhythmic and fast. He was not looking for an easy win anymore. He was hunting for the breakthrough, and he refused to yield to the fatigue pulling at his limbs. He stared at the remaining names, his breathing harsh, and slammed his finger onto the next digit. The 10th name on the list was the last. Mark did not hesitate. He punched the numbers with a force that made the desk rattle. The line clicked open. He did not lead with a question. He led with the solution, his voice stripped of all doubt, vibrating with the raw energy of his month-long grind. He spoke for 30 seconds, detailing exactly how his service would solve the prospect's current bottleneck. Then, he stopped. He held his breath, his chest tight, staring at the blank wall of the garage. The silence on the other end stretched thin. 5 seconds, then 10. Every heartbeat felt like a hammer blow against his ribs. He prepared for the familiar snap of a dial tone. Instead, a heavy exhale drifted through the speaker. "Send over the contract," the voice said. The words hit him like a physical impact. Mark leaned back, his legs losing their strength, and he slid down until he hit the floor. The fear that had anchored him to this room for years evaporated in a single, sharp breath. He looked at the paper, crossed out the final name, and felt the weight of the pen drop from his fingers. The cycle of rejection was broken. He had finally built the bridge. The garage door rattled shut, sealing away the silence of his past. Mark carried his equipment in 2 heavy crates, his steps echoing on the pavement as he walked toward the city center. He pushed open the glass doors of the shared workspace and stopped. The air inside hummed. It was not the quiet of his previous solitude. It was a rhythmic, frantic vibration of keyboards, low-voiced negotiations, and the sharp clatter of coffee mugs. He found his assigned desk in the corner. He cleared a space and set his laptop down. Beside him, 2 strangers were mapping out a project on a glass partition, their voices tight with the urgency of expansion. Mark watched them for a moment, then opened his own files. The atmosphere was thick with intent. He felt a sudden, sharp clarity. Here, complaints were non-existent. Every conversation drifted toward growth, scaling, and market reach. He pulled his chair in, the wheels scraping against the floor, and began to work. The isolation of the garage had been a cage, but this space was a forge. He focused on his screen, his movements precise and fast. He was no longer working alone in the dark. He was part of a machine that demanded more. He leaned into the rhythm of the room, matching his pace to the ambition surrounding him. Mark tracked every cent. He He realized that earning was only half the battle. Keeping it was the true test. He sat at his terminal, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in his eyes. He opened his banking portal. The balance from his recent contract sat there, waiting to be dispersed. He calculated the percentage. 30%. It was a precise, disciplined deduction. He keyed in the routing numbers, creating a recurring transfer that would fire automatically every month. He directed the funds into a low-cost index fund, a vehicle that gathered strength from the collective movement of the entire market. He clicked confirm. The screen flashed a verification message. It was done. He leaned back, listening to the ambient noise of the office, and realized the shift. While he was here, working on his projects, that money was already moving, compounding, and expanding in the background. It was no longer stagnant. It was a secondary engine, a silent partner working while he slept. He watched the cursor blink on his dashboard. He was no longer trading hours for survival. It's building a system that functioned independently of his physical presence. The numbers on the screen began to represent more than currency. They represented time reclaimed. The calendar pages blurred. Mark stopped measuring his progress by the week and started looking at the decade. The garage with its peeling paint and the whiteboard where he once scribbled desperate goals became distant memories. He traded the frantic energy of the startup phase for the deliberate, calculated pace of an architect. He no longer chased the immediate win. He built structures that thrived on their own momentum. His workspace evolved. The cluttered desk in the shared room gave way to a quiet, expansive office where the air remained still and clear. He surrounded himself with books and data, his mind now a filter for high-level strategy rather than daily firefighting. He watched the world move through a wider lens. He saw opportunities where he once saw walls. The whiteboard was gone, replaced by a mental map that was sharper, deeper, and infinitely more complex. He had moved past the stage of survival. He was now operating in a realm of long-term vision, where every decision was a brick in a permanent foundation. He looked out at the changing seasons, recognizing that the person who stood in that garage years ago had been entirely replaced by the man who now understood how to create value from the silence of his own discipline. The glass door slid shut behind him, sealing out the hum of the city. Mark stood at the edge of the balcony, his hands resting on the cold steel railing. Below, the city grid stretched out like a circuit board, lights flickering in steady, predictable patterns. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen glowing against the twilight. A few taps, a secure login, and the balance appeared in crisp, black text. $1 million. The exact figure he had once scribbled in desperate marker on a whiteboard in a dusty garage. He stared at the digits. He waited for the rush, the surge of adrenaline, or the urge to shout at the sky. Nothing came. The air was still. The city traffic moved in a low, rhythmic drone that felt distant and inconsequential. He looked back at the screen, then out at the horizon, and let out a long, slow breath. The number was simply a data point, a marker of completion rather than a destination. He felt the weight of his own stillness. The hunger that had driven him for years had quieted into a deep, steady hum. He was standing exactly where he had promised himself he would, yet the view was different than he had imagined. It was not about the height, but about the clarity of the horizon. Mark turned away from the railing, his silhouette caught in the dark surface of the floor-to-ceiling glass. He looked at his own reflection, really looking for the first time in years. The face staring back was familiar, yet the tension that once defined his jaw was gone. He looked at his hands, steady and calloused. These were the tools that had built the path. He realized the $1 million on his screen was merely a byproduct of the person he had been forced to become. The money was finite, a shadow of the work, but the capacity to solve problems, to persist through the storm, and to create value from nothing that was permanent. He had spent years waiting for a moment to arrive, only to realize he had been building it all along. The doubt that had once paralyzed him in the garage was now replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence. He leaned forward, touching the glass, watching his own eyes. There was no more hunger for external validation. He had stopped waiting for the world to give him a win and had started building his own reality. The transformation was complete. It was never about the account balance. It was about the mind that had finally learned how to build, how to endure, and ultimately, how to stand tall in the silence of his own making.